back, and even with our wealth screening, which came this week, I was really looking forward to getting that data so I can start putting together some lists. And I've had issues with that, not able really to download the information and connect what I need to connect to get the list that I need to get. We're working on that. I hope to have it solved by the end of the week, but you know, just kind of, I think par for the course.
Yeah, it seems like it goes with the territory, right? Well, I'm glad we have this time together, and just a couple of quick disclosures about the recording and our confidentiality. Um, I put together just a little bit of an agenda, and let me just have you take a quick look and see if there's anything that you see on here that needs to be added, deleted, or changed.
No.
Everything look all right?
Hmm.
Well, let's see. Let's take just 1 minute for our briefing, good news, updates, happenings. And let's see, I'll go first. My update is that last week was spring break for all of my grandkids. And so this year we had spring break at Papa and Gogo's house, which meant, let's see, over the course of a week, we had all 3 of our kids and all 9 of our grandkids.
Wow.
And fortunately, that wasn't all of the time. And as much as I enjoyed it, I sure was ready to recover when they all went home. So I guess that's my update. Anything from a kind of an overall standpoint that you'd want to share? Good news, updates, or happenings?
Good news, good news. Well, I have an adult son, which I think we talked about last time. And good news is the car that I co-signed for him to get. He's young. Has now been traded in, and he has a new car all in his own name. That's
All
good
right,
news.
that is good news.
That's great news.
We celebrate all the wins, big or small, right?
It's a big win for him, independence. He's like in that age when he was still in my pocket, and I feel like that's another step out of my pocket. So that's good news.
You bet. Sounds great. Um, I think it's just fun to connect on a personal basis in the midst of all this hard work that we're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah, so thank you. The next thing we had was our wanted to touch base on board self-assessment. And I'm trying to remember, is that something that we have that has been done, or what's the status?
The status of that is 7 of 10 board members have completed it.
Okay.
Um, so I probably need to send a reminder to those other 3 board members. And I'm a little concerned about how they've answered the questions, because everybody answered yes on every single question except
Oh,
one person. One person said, I really don't understand this capital campaign project, which I think is probably more than that one person. That one person was just brave enough to speak up and say, no, I don't understand this.
so I'm just curious, what are your thoughts once we have responses from everybody who's going to respond, and maybe we do, maybe we don't. But what kind of use are you thinking of making of that in terms of next steps?
Well, I was really excited to see that no answer, because to me, that really means that we need to have a conversation at the board level about this capital campaign project, more in depth than what has already been had. And I don't really know what transpired before I arrived, but I know since I've been here, we've not really kind of like had that conversation about what this capital campaign means. Everybody understands that we're building a building, but it's much more than building a building.
Absolutely.
Um, so then I guess my question there is like framing that conversation, things that we definitely want the board to know and be aware of. um, this is going to require a commitment from you. We really want you to make a stretch gift and make a pledge. We're going to be soliciting the community. We need 100% board participation. But beyond that, those are like the nuts and the bolts. I'd really like to inspire them, I guess, before we kind of get down into that level of conversation. So just some pointers around how, what are best practices in that area.
Hmm. Yeah, good questions. Um, I'm curious, do you know, out of, let's see, how many total people? 10 on the board, right?
Hmm.
10 voting board members.
Hmm.
Do you know how many of those 10 have served on a board at the time of a major campaign?
I think none of them.
Okay. Um, so,
Based on the conversations, I haven't asked them directly. That's a question that had I been involved in recruiting them, I probably would have asked, but I wasn't. Um, I think at the outside, like even possibility, maybe one.
okay. Well, the reason I asked that, and of course, I don't know the board culture. You know it better than I, and you don't know it yet as well as you'd like to. But based on what you have told me and my experience with other boards and organizations, um, I'm going to offer a little bit of a guess and a little bit of grace here, right? So my guess is that there's something about the culture of this particular board at this time where we don't want to raise our hand to say, I don't know stuff that apparently we're supposed to know. Anyhow, that's just kind of a hard thing. And yet that's a healthy thing to be able to, to be that real, right? And so one of the things that we found helpful is to be able to have what we call a kind of a pre-campaign board workshop. And
Mm.
you may think about whether you think this would be something that would be welcomed by the board, and whether we should even consider doing that. I will tell you that last week I did I did one of those workshops. Unfortunately, we only had 2 hours for this, and when you're sitting thinking about it, 2 hours seems like a long time. But I will just tell you,
I'm
um, at,
sure it's not.
at the end, everybody was wishing they had more time and feeling overwhelmed with what they now knew that they didn't know as a result of learning the little bit that they did. So anyhow, that's something I would just throw out there as a possibility. Here's what one of the things that I like to do in that setting, first of all, is to ask these same kinds of questions. And so where we're not answering it for the board. So right now, here's kind of what's happening almost. And that is, Jacqueline asks, would you whisper in my ear, what is your experience as a board member with a major campaign? And everybody's telling you either audibly or inaudibly, I don't have any. So now you know, but nobody else knows. And so one of the things that I get to do as a facilitator, this kind of thing, is to help them as a group know where they are and then be able to ask some of these questions. So let's just say for a minute, let's see, 7 out of 10, maybe, maybe 1 or 2. Let's just be really optimistic and say that there are 3 or 4 people who actually do have experience. Well, so I'm going to reach out to them first and say, with the experience that you have, and now being at a new place in another organization for a major campaign, what is it that you wish you had known at the beginning that came later. So anyhow, that lets them leverage what they do know and kind of turns them into a kind of a mini hero. And we don't mind making heroes out of our board members, right? Whether they deserve it or not at the moment. And then when your outsider asks that question then of the entire group, so right now we're not even at the start line. We're not at the finish line. We're not at the starting line. We're just getting ready to kind of get dressed for the race. What are some questions you have? What are some topics that we need to touch on? So now we're responding to their request rather than here's what you as a board member or I as a board member, here's what we're not receptive to. We show up in a room and somebody else tells us you're ignorant and I'm here to enlighten you. But on the other hand, if I say I'm ignorant, will you please enlighten me? Just changes the dynamics entirely, right? So so I guess that's one of the things to consider is, would it make sense for us to do? And sometimes we'll use the language of retreat. Sometimes we'll refer to it as a special workshop. But anyhow, with that pre-campaign tag, it provides a forum for us to answer these questions. What's expected of the board? What's expected of board members? And when I think about what needs to be done that either can't or won't be done by the board or board members, who's going to do all that? Oh, Jacqueline's going to raise all that money single-handedly, right? Of course not.
You know what? I think that's a real important conversation because not that they're any different in the perspective that they have. A lot of people think that development professionals, it's all your ball of wax. When it's a partnership.
Yeah.
Right.
Right. And so anyhow, like I said, one of the things that I've just found over the years is that board members especially hear differently when the message is delivered by the different messenger. And when I'm delivering message that reinforces what you've already been telling them, they hear it differently, and then they view you differently. Their view and the validation of your experience and your professionalism is kind of an almost invisible but very valuable part of that process. And I'm going to say and I don't know, I'm curious, what would you say is the CEO's campaign experience?
None.
And what would you say, how would you address the awareness that I don't have that experience?
I think she's aware.
Okay.
However, she doesn't know what she doesn't know.
Okay.
And I think that is true. That statement is true of the board members as well. I think they think it's, and it may be, I've just come into this community, but I know the work that it takes to raise money. And they don't know the work that it takes to raise money. They don't know all the inputs that need to happen. Because I think they're ready to go out there and ask for money, and we don't have our ducks in a row.
Yep.
And what we don't want to do is ruin the reputation of our nonprofit by not having our ducks in a row.
Yeah.
We have some very sophisticated donors in this area, and we don't want to go and not have our ducks in a row.
Right. So I love that analogy about ducks in a row. And in one way, I think this is kind of the picture of the ducks in a row, right? So we figure out, we see here's what the whole picture is. Here's where we are, here's where we're going. And then you say there's a lot of waddling for us to do between here and the finish line. One of the things that I would really encourage you, every opportunity you have now is to be sharing this on a frequent basis with your CEO. Walk through it with the CEO, with the development committee of the board, with your board chair, to let that be a part of that educational process. And I don't know what your experience is, Jacqueline, but this is going to be a simple, kind of a simple concept. But I find that when you already know I'm old school, right? But when this is a piece of paper, right? It's a page. But when we can talk to the page, we've got a page and we can focus on it and talk to the paper, it allows us to communicate in some marvelous ways with other people that think they're talking to the paper. We're really talking to each other. And so one of the things that I would suggest that you might do is even, I'm going to be ambitious here for a moment. Even today, sit down with your CEO, talk to the paper and ask the thing, one of the things that we're already seeing, that's an announcement. One of the things that we're already seeing is that our board is in a position of needing more preparation for leading the organization through a major campaign. Okay, that's not the same thing as saying these people are stupid and we got to teach them. No, but they're in a position of needing more education. I'm curious, if it were strictly up to you, when do you think would be the best time for us to do our first and maybe even our most intense pre-campaign preparation for the board? And have that conversation with her, equip her to have that conversation with the board chair. And I don't know the answer, but based on what I do know, here's my guess for us. The answer would be, there's no reason to delay. How about sooner instead of later? And so if that's the case, then I'd say, that may be something that we'd want to say, well, let's, maybe we should expand the scope and have a, whether it's a 2, 3, 4 hour, whatever, board workshop, board retreat for pre-campaign preparation, so that we can, again, using a familiar phrase, so that we can find out what the page is and find out what it takes to get on the page, and then come to agreement about whether we're going to get on the page or not. Because, and again, I don't know the board. We talked a little bit about the profile the other day, but there may be some people on the board that would legitimately say, once they heard that, this is not what I signed up for. And we would say, you're exactly right. You signed up for the creation phase, and we're created. Now we're moving rapidly to the expansion phase. It is different. And if this, and this isn't what anybody signed up for, if you want to make the transition and remain on the board, that's great. If you want to say, you know what, I signed up for phase 1, phase 1's over, I think I'm ready to step aside. And we're going to say, we will support you in that as well.
Okay, now let me ask you a question about that, because we already know that everyone on our board was not recruited for capacity. So in this conversation, is it a viable option for a board member to say, I'm not interested, I can't, I just don't have the capacity for this phase, but I know someone who is, that could serve on a, capital campaign cabinet.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something that you've seen, worked with, acceptable? What's been your experience with that?
Yeah. Did I tell you I love your questions?
I ask good questions.
You do ask good questions. And I mean, that's just another great way to talk to this paper, because, part of what this said, you used a word that means something to you, capacity, right? I mean, you and I throw that word back and forth and we know exactly what we're talking about. And I want to suggest that we would assume, when you talk about the remaining part of your administration and your board, we must assume that they do not have the same definition. And so even capacity. And so the first thing I want to say is, what's the board member's role in giving? And we've got that on our agenda for today. And this is a great time for us to underscore that, sure, once we define capacity, it would be great if everybody on this board was a high capacity donor or prospect. But here's what we know. Everybody on the board today are people that we're ordinary people. So when it comes to board giving, it's not as much about capacity as it is about generosity. And so then we're going to talk about the expectation. We've got a twofold expectation. One is, without exception, every board member will make a personal financial contribution to the campaign. No exceptions. We'll talk, and you won't say that. I will. And because if they want to fire somebody, it's got to be me, not you. And anyhow, they're going to hear it differently from me than you. So anyhow, that's one of the things that we talk about. And that if you say, I'm not going to contribute, here's what we're going to say. That's okay. It just means you can't be part of the board during this season. And somebody else says, well, I can't make the top gift. And we're going to say, that's okay. Here's what we want you to consider. Would you make your top gift, or number 2 or number 3? Top 3 charitable interests for you. That's generosity. And that is a scale that self-adjusts. Yours fits you and nobody else. The gift chart isn't designed to fit you. It fits the campaign. So anyhow, again, all that's kind of, and so the question about, okay, now I'm, by my definition now, I'm not high capacity, but I know somebody who is. Then that's one of those things where we say, okay, there are lots of ways to be involved. There's the board. I'm looking at it right now. I sent this to you, didn't I?
Oh yeah, I had
Yeah.
downloaded it from the toolkit as well.
Good, yeah. So anyhow, there's the board, and then I see this thing that's called a core committee, and then there's a steering committee that shows up maybe sooner or later. There's this campaign chair, and there's nucleus fund committee. So anyhow, that's one of those things where we say, you know what, there's really a profile for every one of those. So the person you're thinking about, tell me more about them. And then that's where we sit down and say, okay, now that you've told me about their capacity perceived, their affinity, do they care about what we care about, and their generosity, are they generous or are they just wealthy? Not the same thing, right? But then now we know, now that we know more about them, then I'm going to ask that person who knows them. So if it was strictly up to you and you had to pick one of these points of engagement, which one do you think would be perfect for them? And so let's say they say, I can't see them being involved for more than a couple of months. We'd say, that sounds like maybe the planning committee. This is during the campaign planning phase. Before we even kick off committee, we're going to have between 12 and 18 members. And let's go just talk to them. And we have that in mind, but see if they think what we think.
Okay. So here's where I'm having the dissonance. And I won't know until we have the conversation. But based on my experience, I think there's going to be pushback from the administration regarding such a straightforward conversation. 1. 2, I think there's fear of not having board members because, as you said earlier in this conversation, this was really like let's get people in the seats. This is the creation board because all of our former board members resigned. And what are we going to do if these board members resign? And 3, we didn't have such a straightforward conversation with them coming on to the board. So this is going to be like a shock to the system, which I'm sure you've all heard before.
Never.
Like, I don't have these fears, but I know just based on conversations that I've had that that's a concern.
Yeah. I think you're right on target. And when you say the administration, can you be more specific?
Yes, the CEO.
Okay. Anybody else?
I think there may be a little dissonance with there. We have a board consultant as well, works with the CEO, um, who I know she has. I know she understands what a board needs to be, what it should be. I know she understands dynamics of fundraising and having board members with time, talent, and treasure. I know she understands that. But there again, because there was no board, everyone was asked to resign. It was a matter of getting people in the seats. I know that we're moving towards being more strategic as new board members come on board. But I don't. This conversation is one that I don't think can be avoided.
Mm-hmm. I agree. I'm making a note here. So one of the things for you to think about is whether it would be helpful to bring your CEO into one of these calls and for the conversation, and I can prompt any part of that very naturally. And so that again, if there's pushback or throwback or blowback, let it all come back to me. But what I find is when we have the conversation that says, what are some of the hopes and what are some of the fears? If people will be straightforward enough to own their own, I'll tell you, and I'll just tell you, here's what can be fatal, and that's for the inexperienced who have no fears. In other words, I don't know enough to be afraid.
Right, right. But see, that statement encapsulates what I think is happening.
Yeah. And so, again, I think it's my job, again, not to make somebody afraid, but my job is to help pinpoint fears. And by the way, have we ever talked about my books?
Mm-mm.
So just in a nutshell, I got two main books. I've co-authored a couple others, but my first book is titled Asking About Asking: Mastering the Art of Conversational Fundraising. Not confrontational, not transactional, but conversation, which is large gifts. The other book, my most recent, is titled The Intentional Board. And it's why your board doesn't work and how to fix it. But what I was going to tell you is in the between the first and second edition of Asking About Asking, I did nationwide research around this simple question and asked, I think almost between 600 and 700 fundraising leaders, whether volunteers or professionals, ask them to respond to this question: what is your number one obstacle to successful one-on-one fundraising? Successful one-on-one fundraising. What's your biggest obstacle? And just the question itself assumes that you have one. Now, I would tell you, out of those hundreds of responses, there were a handful of people that said none.
Right.
And those people are just in denial, and that's okay.
Right.
But everybody else, even though I didn't say, what are you afraid of? They told me what they were afraid of. And once we can pinpoint what they're afraid of, we can go to work on it. Somebody says, well, how many times have you heard this phrase, Jacqueline? I don't know any of those rich people. I mean, that's kind of an ugly phrase, but
yeah,
we hear it all the time, right?
I don't know anybody,
Yeah.
which is not true.
Right.
It's never true.
Right. So, but anyhow, or somebody else says, I don't know how to approach them. I don't know how to connect with them. So all of those to me kind of fall into the same heading, and it's what I call relationship deficit. And so if you have a relationship deficit, that's different than a relationship obstacle or relationship offense. The obstacle and offense means we had a relationship and we don't anymore. Something bad happened there. And sometimes that exists where, I'm going to use you as an example, that was created before you showed up. So you didn't create it, you don't own it, but it kind of owns you temporarily. And so anyhow, sometimes we have a conversation with that person, and Jacqueline's engaged in that conversation. They say, well, wham, this thing happened. And Jacqueline says, well, number one, I'm so sorry. That sounds really painful. And then she says, number two, that wasn't me. I'm new. I'm curious, what would have to happen for us to restore what was lost there? And then I've had somebody say, I don't think it's possible. Okay. Well, if it was possible, what would have to happen, But, usually the person who has that offense, and it's very real, it's undesirable, but it's real, they don't even want it. And they say,
Right.
the essence of what almost every case, what would have to take place for there to be repair? The other party has to say, I'm sorry, we blew it. And a lot of times, whoever the predecessor was that did it, they're too proud to do that. That's why they're gone.
Right.
You're
Well,
not.
let me tell you, I've already used that strategy. So yeah. But I think this idea of a pre-campaign workshop is a really good idea, because right now the board does not know what it doesn't know, and they're thinking this is going to be like a simple slam dunk. We're going to go ask a couple people, and not really understanding the inputs that need to go in before we even get to that point. My fear is the organization having egg on its face.
Mhm.
And so that's a very real conversation that I can have. I know that we have a board retreat coming up,
Oh,
which that may be a good time to take a couple hours during that board retreat. The development committee has already asked for a workshop of types, like we don't know how to ask, please teach us
okay.
how to ask. So I'm thinking that part of that conversation could be, there are lots of different parts to that. How do we ask?
Yeah, absolutely.
Some of that could be touched on in this, and then we can follow up on that. So I think that's a really good follow up to this board self-assessment, and I can start having those conversations. Unfortunately, our board does not meet every month, and the board retreat, I think, is planned for June, which I don't know. I'll see if maybe I can get that moved, get this particular piece moved up, because it's March, and I feel like
Yeah.
if we could at least get this done, we could make a lot of headway before June.
Well, I think that's that's another important part of the conversation, which again encompasses your leaders, board chair and CEO. And that question, what is it that we feel like that we want our board to have? What tools do we want our board to have as we go into this campaign? And let them answer that. Then the next question is when. When's the best time for them to have those? And then if it's, and I'm just, as you know, making up. So March is over, right? It's April now, almost. Week from tomorrow? No, week from today, April 1st. So anyhow, it's April. And do you know when in June the retreat scheduled for?
I don't know exactly. I'm thinking like the second Saturday in June or
Okay,
something like that.
so second Saturday, we'll call it the middle of June. Okay, so we've got all of April and all of May and half of June. That's 10 weeks. So if the leaders want to equip the leader group, the board, with tools, there's three options all of a sudden, right? One is we could wait until the middle of June. Another one is that we could do something to kind of bridge the gap between now and then. And the other one is that we could actually reschedule June. And I think if we go into that, I'm using we to refer to Jacqueline and Kent, but it's really you.
I
But if,
understand.
yeah, but if we go into that and we don't care, because it's not just about you, it's not just about me, so we don't care. Here's one of the things that Simple Kent figured out a long time ago, and that is the best prepared and best executed board retreat is worth nothing if nobody's present.
That's true.
So if June 7th is the right time, but if April 30th could be the right time, great. But if it has to stay with June 7th, then you and I are going to leverage some strategies to get us from here to there. So anyhow, again, I think just from a leadership standpoint, how do we lead leaders and equip them to make good decisions? That's our job. As much as sometimes we wish we could just decide for them.
Okay.
So anyhow, I really think kind of several of the topics that we have on the agenda today kind of roll up under this exploration of what is a next step on a next priority. It's not the only next step, and it's not the only priority, but it's a big one.
It's a big one.
Yeah.
Because I think, as far as the core committee is concerned, I pretty much have that laid out as to who would be on the core committee.
Okay.
Myself, the CEO, the board chair. Going to ask the architect if he will be on the committee, just so he can keep the building up to the fundraising. Where are we in fundraising versus where are we in building? The corporate secretary, which is really the board consultant that we have working with the CEO. I think it's important for her to be there because she is very structured and will help me to move things forward. And then the chair of the development committee.
Oh, good.
Now, where I've gotten with that is figuring out because this ad hoc committee will be a committee of the development committee. That's the way the development charter is written.
You're saying the core committee will be?
Yes.
Okay, got it.
So at our April development committee, I'll put forth this core committee group, so it'll be in the minutes of the development committee. So that's where we are with that.
Okay.
After we have our April meeting, I should be able to move forward to really get this core committee kind of getting our first meeting and laying out the plan and where we need to go.
Okay.
Working goal, I feel like we're back at square zero.
Okay.
We were looking at a potential building that would be renovated and some build out, which would give us like some core numbers to start working with. That fell through. There was another offer on the building. It was under contract. And now we don't have a like property B. And someone mentioned on one of the calls about a real estate committee, perhaps, but I'm not sure exactly what that means. We're working with a realtor, but I don't really feel that realtor has been working for us because he's not really sent us any properties. I know that realtors work kind of alone. There's no group of realtors you're going to get together to do that. So we're kind of at a standstill there. But I don't feel that I have even a base to start asking someone to put together even estimates so that we can determine what our goal is.
So you mentioned an architect. has the architect been formally engaged?
That's a good question. Right now, our agreement with him is pro bono for like an hour a month or something like that to look at properties and determine whether or not they will work for us. There's not, he's not being paid right now.
Okay. Is there an assumption or an expectation that this architect is going to be the architect for a project?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm just going to make a suggestion. If it was stronger, it'd be a recommendation, but it's a suggestion. I think it would be wise for the board to consider taking some action. This doesn't have to be writing a check, but to formally agree and for the architect to agree that we're going to work together on this. And in fact, there's an AIA contract that I think all architects work with that defines exactly what the relationship is, how the money works, and when it's paid.
Okay. I have something similar to that because I asked for a copy of the contract. I'm going to send it to you just so you can
Okay,
eyeball it and tell me.
will do.
Okay.
Yeah. So anyhow, so with that in mind, and by the way, in your own assessment, as you look at that that timeline for the toolkit that shows those campaign committees and starts with pre-campaign planning phase and ends with post-campaign, where do you think we are right now?
We're in pre-pre.
Okay, fair enough.
We're definitely in pre-pre. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm doing my best to assess our readiness and work on the core. And I have that big calendar, so that's why I'm looking.
Oh, good, good.
Put together the core committee. So we're in process of doing that.
Good.
In process of assessing our internal readiness. So all in that readiness phase.
Okay, that's great. So here's the point I was going to make. Since we are in pre, it's okay that we don't have a site, we don't have it selected, we don't have it purchased, we don't have working architectural drawings because it's preliminary for all that.
Okay.
But since we do have an architect, and if we don't already, once we formally have them engaged, the first thing they need to do is what they call their planning phase, or excuse me, the program phase. And a good architect, and I'm assuming that you have a good architect for this purpose. There are good architects that design nuclear power plants who could do us absolutely no good. But a good architect whose capabilities are in line with our needs, they're going to start with a programming phase that doesn't have any drawings of any lines on a piece of paper. But it's like this: they're going to bring together in one form or another, the community of Safe Children Coalition, and say, when we talk about a building, what purpose does this building need to serve? What problems does it need to solve? What processes does it need to accommodate? And based on that, then the architect's going to come back and tell us, regardless of where this building is, here's about how much space you're going to need for what purposes. And a really good architect is going to also listen and say, you know what, in our community, which is Sarasota, right? The absolute ideal location for this building, for this purpose, for this organization in this time is going to be in this zip code, whatever. And so anyhow, what's one of the biggest mistakes we can make is we we accept the gift of free land and maybe even a free building, but it's in the wrong place. It's in the industrial section. It's right next to the nuclear power plant, you know?
Mhm.
And that's a great place for something. It's a terrible place for us. But anyhow, the point being, at this phase, with where we are right now, we need to have an idea of what kind of a real estate footprint do we need? Is it 1 square foot, 10,000 square feet? Is it 1 acre, 10 acres? Your architect can answer that question.
Okay.
And they need to be able to tell us that your footprint on that land is, do we need 1,000 square feet, 5,000, 10,000, 100,000? Okay.
I think we are somewhat there. Um, yeah, here it is. I'm going to send this to you. I think we are somewhat there. I don't know that, don't know that there has been a real meeting of SCC community, but I'm not sure what you mean when you say that. There is something on the back of the contract that talks about the square footage, different rooms. Um, but I can ask the question. I don't know how that came about, if it was just, the CEO in a room saying this is what we need, or if it involved also the people who actually work in the building talking about, this is what we see that we need.
Right.
I kind of think that the latter didn't happen.
And so anyhow, what we're talking about here is once we know the answers to some of those questions, then it gives us a basis on which to make some assumptions. And so creating a working goal is a budget, and a budget by definition, regardless of what it's for, a budget is just a collection of assumptions, but it's a statement of assumptions. So for example, we are assuming a building in the neighborhood of 10 to 12,000 square feet. Okay, if that's our assumption, our budget's going to be based on 12,000, right? Today, since we're preliminary. The next assumption, which the architect's going to tell us, a building of this nature at this time, and as best as I can forecast construction 3 years down the road, whatever, your construction cost is going to be someplace between $280 and $350 a square foot. Okay, so now we take 12,000 times 350, and now we have a working goal for construction. We find out we need approximately 1.5 acres, and 1.5 acres in this zip code or area code, whatever it is going to range between A and B. So we're going to take the bigger now. Okay, now we know the cost of the location. So anyhow, in answer to that question about working goal, by having the core committee in process, we're going to, one of the things I'm going to share with you once I get some of those assumptions is I'm just going to start dropping it in. And if we come up with a number of $3 million for construction, that only answers one line out of about 30 lines. But every line begs us to make an assumption about something and then state the basis of our assumption.
Okay.
Endowment or no endowment, that's a yes or no. If it's a yes, if it's a no, then it's pretty easy. We know the number, it's 0. If it's yes, then we're going to come up with an assumption. What's the basis of that assumption? Somebody says, I don't like it. Okay, we'll change the assumption. We don't care. Contingency. This is where it gets fun with architects because they are going to include one kind of contingency in their projections, but there's going to be another kind of contingency that goes beyond the scope of their work that's very relevant to the scope of the campaign. And so once we put all those assumptions out there, and then we bring the core committee together, we ask the questions and we let them answer them. And then we share this collection of assumptions that turns it all into the common denominator of $1. And we say, now our working goal is $11.2 million. And it's made up of all these things that total to $11.2 million. And for somebody that says, I don't like it, we can agree, I don't either. We had a meeting, we wished it was free. And guess what? It's still not. And so anyhow, we say, okay, what do we want to not end up with as a result of this campaign? I had one client, Jacqueline, this is going to sound ridiculous because it was, but they wanted the building to cost less than what a building cost. And so, they were zeroed in on two things that didn't fit. One was the total price of construction, and the other was square footage. And so anyhow, I'm not an architect, I'm a recovering accountant, but I told them, I said, if we're going to hold firmly onto those two, then I said, we have a different decision we have to make. They said, what's that? I said, we have to choose between roof and walls, because we can have one, but we can't have them both. And it doesn't matter to me, but you need to decide so that when we go to the donors, we can be transparent and forthright and say, you know what? We decided we want this much space under roof. We don't have enough for walls, electrical, there won't be any furnishings, but at least we'll have a big roof, because we can't sell them one thing and deliver something else.
Right.
So anyhow, those are get real messages, and those conversations are inherently uncomfortable.
But I like so I'm starting to formulate this process in my head. The working goals, a budget, we can drop the numbers in based on what we think we need. But I like the idea of the core committee kind of being that group that looks at those numbers before, they're blessed and sent to the board to say, this is what our campaign goal is. And what I'm hearing is, although I'm anxious about this, we're kind of right in the timeline of this pre-camp planning phase.
Yeah.
Okay.
So one other thing, I'm looking at my calendar real quick. I see we've got about 7 minutes. I could probably go 5 past if we need to.
Okay.
But the I think another thing, as we think about working goal, I think it's helpful for you and me to acknowledge that this a working goal is a goal that can change, and we know it will change. And in essence, we have a working goal, and we may have a different working goal, but the working goal in one form or another persists until we go public.
Right.
And when we go public, we're going to go public with a goal that is different. Oftentimes it's different than each of the iterations along the way, but it's also more refined than we have ever had before, because we're further into the journey. And so part of what you and I have to do, again, is to understand where a goal comes from, be transparent, be visible about that, and lead with process on how a goal comes into existence, and then how it changes along the way, and whose goal it is. Because I don't have a goal, and you don't have a goal, and we never will. At some point early, the board will adopt a working goal, and that will be our goal until the board changes it. And what will change that, assuming for a moment that we do a feasibility study, when we do a feasibility study, we have to be testing some number. And at the end of the feasibility study, we're usually going to adopt what we then call an a preliminary goal that's a different number. And that preliminary goal is where we're going to start the quiet phase of the campaign. And during the quiet phase, I've got another campaign, Jacqueline, that last week had a banner day where they had pretty much been stalled at halfway to the goal. Last Wednesday, St. Patrick's Day, they had a burst of commitments that took them almost to 80% of the goal. And then another 3 solid pending requests, which if those are approved at the level they're requested, will take them to about 120% of the goal.
Wow.
So when that happens, what will we do? Fold up the tent and go home? No way. We're going to have a revised goal. And they haven't even gone public yet. So anyhow, what we're going to go public with actually is what we're going to call a formal goal. So let's just, I mean, this was a small campaign, $1.3 million goal, but for them it's huge, huge, huge. But they are probably going to go public with a $2 million goal and with over $1.5 million committed to it. So when they go public, that's what we call a formal goal.
Mm-hmm.
And if things continue to go well, we'll probably raise the goal during the public phase. And that'll be called a revised goal. So how many different goals do you have? A whole bunch. But the point is we have one at a time. And whatever goal we have, we know what it is because the board took formal action and there's a motion, a second, and more yeses than nos, and it's recorded in the minutes. So
Okay.
anyhow, I think that's helpful, again, to the CEO, to the board chair, to the campaign chair, to each of these committees. We don't know what the goal is going to be tomorrow. We do know what it was yesterday, and we do know what it is today. We know what it consists of, and we know how and when changes take place.
Gotcha. Okay.
We've got just a short time left. I wanted to be sensitive. Were there further thoughts? I know we touched briefly on this board member giving topic, but is there more depth you want to gain today?
Well, I can just tell you the progress I've made on actually having the governance committee kind of address it and work through it. I suggested to, and I kind of have to communicate in triad with the CEO and the board chair and also the board consultant, because my CEO leans heavily on the board consultant. So I know she's going to be pulled into the conversation. So I suggested that I provide, all of the giving information and a process to the development committee. They could approve the materials that then would go to the governance committee, and that the governance committee present kind of this picture at the board meeting. Meanwhile, every board member would actually know their status of giving, because we'll prepare a statement and send that to them privately.
Good.
The board chair, although I suggested that she only deliver good news and let the governance committee kind of handle this because that's in their charter, was going to speak with the governance chair to talk about his comfortability of kind of having this conversation, because he himself is new. And so I need to follow up with her to see where that went, if she got a chance to talk to him. But in the absence of him doing it, she is perfectly comfortable doing it herself.
Okay. And I wanted to clarify something. Did you say, is the board consultant a member of the board?
She is not a voting member of the board. However, she carries the title corporate secretary.
Is there a officer of the board that's secretary?
No, I don't think so.
Well, if that is in alignment with your bylaws, I'd be really surprised.
Yeah, I don't want to go over our time, but I can check real quick.
Okay, well, and that's not crucial. As we think about our next meeting, which by the way is April 8th, same time, 10 to 11.
Yeah.
Right now, are there specific topics that you want to be sure that we have on the agenda? This can be fluid and change as needed, but if you've got something at the top of your mind, I wanted to make note of it.
I think I have a couple of things to do between now and then, and that is have this conversation with my CEO and about this issue or of training the board, the
Okay.
pre-campaign workshop. Um, I'd really like to make some headway on just uh, um, this working goal, like
Okay.
some number, any number.
Okay. Yeah, I got it.
And then solidifying the core committee and setting up our first meeting, which will be sometime in April.
Okay.
And the other thing that I have on my plate that I think is a big rock is an internal conversation about donor fatigue and individual programs of, fundraising for their own programs and getting that into some semblance of we're one cohesive organization and we need to protect the messages that we're providing to donors and the community as well.
Okay.
Um, and I actually initiated a leadership meeting for us to start that conversation, which is taking place tomorrow.
Okay. Okay. So did we talk about the question of integrated versus capital only campaign?
No, but I think that based on the size of the development shop, it has to be an integrated campaign.
Okay, good. Well, the reason I mentioned that, we can go into more depth. I made a note on that, but when you think about donor fatigue, internal pressures, worst thing we can do is have multiple campaigns as opposed to one unified campaign.
Or multiple asks.
Yeah,
Like
exactly.
it's not even a campaign. It's just that programs are used to
Right,
doing whatever.
right. Yeah, so again, with with the history and the size of organization, I'm going to say this has to be a centralized fundraising shop. And unless there's some really good reasons that neither you or I know right now, it has to be an integrated campaign so that we can make one ask of one donor that spans all of their philanthropy for one period of time, call it 3 years.
Mhm.
And because here's what you and I, and I mean, this is my posture with or without a major campaign. I would much rather take the time to deliberately solicit one gift or grant for a 3-year period of time and then spend 35 months of stewardship so that after we get 3 years down the road, we're all thrilled. They did what they wanted to do. We did what they funded. They know what they funded. They love what the result is. And now they're ready to make another 3-year commitment at a higher level, rather than us, every time something comes up, we're going knocking on their door. That's where the donor fatigue comes from.
Exactly.
So, yeah. And so the other thing in closing, let me just mention, and I don't know if we touched on this before, but typically, including you and me, we can go up to 6 people on these calls. So if it's strategic to bring in other members of your team or the core committee, the CEO, board chair, development chair along the way, and people may drop in and out. You and I are going to be here, but
Mhm.
I want you to know that you have that liberty, and if anytime that's needed, you can feel free to share the link or ask me to email out to whomever. Again, I want you to have what you need when you need it, and
Right.
I'll do my best to do my part of that equation.
Right. Well, the first person I think I may have joined us is the CEO,
Good.
um, especially as it relates to this pre-campaign workshop. I'm going to have a
Okay.
conversation with her, see how that goes. Um, so yeah, because I
Well,
want her to understand the breadth of what that includes.
good. Very good. Well, Jacqueline, between now and then, please, if needed, don't hesitate to reach out, call or email, whatever, and we'll keep pressing forward.
Yeah, will do. I think some real progress was made here today, and you let me know what you think about that architect contract if
Okay.
we do
Yeah,
something.
it may be a couple days before I can really unpack that, but I will. I'll do that.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Have a great day.
See you soon.
All right, bye-bye.
This is Jacqueline.